I spoke at the national conference in the Finger Lakes a couple of years ago. So it's great to be back with all of you. I've done a couple other virtual things over the years with you. And then I want to thank Uncorked also from Hermosa Beach, who's a great supporter of Brooks and who helped coordinate bringing me into this event. I'm super excited about it. Our winery is up in the Willamette Valley of Oregon. It's my family's winery. It was founded back in 1998 by my brother, Jimmy Brooks. He came into the industry super passionate about wanting to restore the reputation of Riesling in Oregon, as well as biodynamic farming and really kind of returning to the roots of the style of Pinot Noir that was made there when it first started. So kind of in that less extracted, higher acid, more food friendly style of Pinot Noir. So we've been in business obviously for a long time. We've always stuck to those traditions and those varietals. We make about 20,000 cases. We're located in Amity, Oregon, which if you look at the 100-mile region of the Willamette Valley, we're kind of dead center. We're just a little bit north of the city of Salem. We're about an hour south of Portland. We do have our own estate vineyard. We have 20 acres. 10 of them were planted back in the early 70s, Riesling and Pommard, and the rest were planted in the mid-90s. And then we source from about 30 other vineyards. So our approach to winemaking is really about collecting small lots of fruit from around the valley, because every soil type makes a difference, every clone makes a difference, every varietal, every aspect, every elevation makes a difference. And so we really like to pull together a nice variety so that we can blend and get back to style and balance without manipulating the wine. So we are biodynamic certified, which is super important to us. We are also a certified B Corporation, which is like a good business certification. There's only 3,600 of us in the world. 18 of them are wineries, 9 of them are in the Willamette Valley. So I think that's a great testament to how much Oregon cares about not only the way they grow grapes, but the way that they run their businesses. And then we're also members of 1% for the Planet. So we donate 1% of our revenues back to environmental-based nonprofits. So we're working with a company right now that's all into soil health and the impact on climate change. So they're all into farming. It's a company called Kiss the Ground. They're actually based in LA. I recommend you check out their website if you care about soil and farming. I was excited to do this event because I hosted a river cruise on the Douro last November. And when I did that, the cruise line asked me to do a compare and contrast tasting of Oregon and the wines on the Douro. And as you can imagine, it was really a stretch to find any similarities at all. So when I heard about this idea and some other regions of Portugal where there could be similarities because the climate and the growing regions are so similar, I thought this would be a lot of fun to do. So you're in for a big treat. We've already pre-tasted the pairings of wines and we're super excited about them. So thank you for having me.
Thank you, Janie. My name is Sandy. I am co-owner and founder of Diniz Cellars. We import and distribute Portuguese wines in California. And we're a really small company. We just started maybe a couple of years ago. I started my career in a completely different field. I'm Portuguese. I grew up in a very traditional European Portuguese household where wine was at the table every meal. So our relationship with wine was that, this is something that we have all the time. It's not something that's meant to be consumed just an occasion or so special that you can't really drink it on a Wednesday night. So when I started to figure out my life, I knew that I wanted to go into wine and I wanted to bring Portuguese wine to the United States because finally Portugal has been creating wine of quality and of substance, let's say within the last 25 or 30 years. I think a lot of people, if they even know where Portugal is, they only think of one thing, and that's port wine. Port has been one of the major exports for hundreds and hundreds of years, but they're finally making really incredible, high quality, great value still wines that we think are just amazing. And I am really excited to share these with you guys today. So a little bit about Portugal overall. It's really, really small. It's right next to Spain, if you need a mental picture of where it's at. And you could probably fit 3 Portugals into 1 California. It is that small. But we have over 250 native varietals. We are starting to see a little bit of Cab, a little bit of Chardonnay, a little bit of those international varietals being planted in Portugal. But because we have such unique terroir, such unique varietals, for us it's important to really highlight what Portugal is doing really well. And our producers are all small family. It's what we consider a new generation of producers and winemakers. So these are people that haven't necessarily been around for, 5 generations. These are people who are young, they're educated, they've gotten their master's in viticulture from the Lisbon University. They've gone to Napa and Bordeaux and New Zealand to get a couple of vintages under their belts. And then they came back home and they are replanting the land that has been left vacant for generations that belonged to their grandmother, belonged to an uncle, or was just sort of sitting there. And they want to reinvigorate the region. So I think that the ones that are coming out of there are absolutely spectacular. If you don't have the ones that we're going to taste today, I really encourage you to go to your nearest wine shop and ask about Portuguese wine. And I think you're really going to be blown away. Now, the reason behind the Oregon and the Portugal is this. When I introduce Portuguese wine to people, I like to come from a place of familiarity, right? So some people think that Portugal is in South America. So that not being the case, I like to say, well, let's bring up a map. And actually, I want to share one with you. I like to say Vinha Verde, for example, is a good comparison to, give me 1 second. Let me share it now.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So if you think about Vinha Verde, this is in the very northwest part of Portugal, and it's kind of where Oregon and Washington are at. The climates are very similar. They're the coldest and the rainiest regions of their respective countries. And in terms of the growing capability for their wines, these regions create very light, very bright, very refreshing wines. And I always like to say, if you like a certain kind of wine, look to Vinha Verde and then we can compare it to an Oregon. The second region that I'm actually really excited about is the Down region, which is down here. It's further south. It's right next to the Douro. This is the Douro River where Janie went on her cruise. Here's Porto. So the Down is actually further south than the Douro, but it's remarkably refreshing. And both Oregon and the Down region are both known as the Burgundian regions of their countries. So we'll really get to explore sort of the styles and the qualities that make these regions similar, but also so uniquely different. So I'm very excited to share these with you guys. We'll be starting with this white and this Riesling. So if you have those, I suggest you bring those up as your first 2 tastings. So Janie is going to help me sort of talk through these wines. I encourage you all to taste them with us. If you don't have these in front of you, then enjoy whatever you do have in front of you. If you have any questions, ask. Yeah, we hope to have a really great session with you all. All right, so the first one is the Vara dos Ares Alvarinho. Again, this is one right here if you have it in front of you. So Alvarinho is a varietal. It's a white varietal from the northern part of Vinha Verde. It's right across the river from Spain, Rías Baixas. And what we love about this Alvarinho is that it's high in acid, but still very elegant. It has a beautiful white fruit, pineapple-y, almost a maracuja or a passion fruit quality to it, but the acidity is not so searing. It's actually really elegant. And they say that if you've never had Alvarinho, but you like a dry Riesling, these are 2 varietals that are similar in in flavor and in aroma. So this is a really good comparison between the two regions. And I welcome Janie to talk about her Riesling a little bit.
Sure. So we have the 2017 Ara Riesling. So Ara is a really special wine in our portfolio. We're just crazy enough that we make 23 different Rieslings. We make everything from sparkling, traditional method dry to dessert. But one of the things that we found over time, there's a couple other really kind of geeky Riesling producers in Oregon, both Tresatum and Chehalem. So the three of us went through a couple of years where we actually traded barrels of our pressed juice from our estates, because all of our estates were on different types of soil. There's two primary soil types in Oregon. One is volcanic and the other is marine sedimentary. The third was the windblown less soils. And we really wanted to understand the impact of soil on Riesling. We're that geeky. Like, everybody can talk about in Oregon the impact of soil on Pinot Noir, but we wanted to learn about it in Riesling. So with the volcanic soil, which is most of where we get our fruit and what our vineyard is planted on, you get a lot of citrus qualities, a lot of zest qualities, a lot of minerality. But probably straight up next to the Salvareño would have been very similar, more similar than these two are, because ours is a blend of both volcanic and marine sedimentary soil. And marine sedimentary soils bring more stone fruits and more of those tropical notes. So the Ara is a combination 50-50 of two of those, both from old vine vineyards, but it really shows kind of the breadth of what you can do with Riesling in Oregon. It is dry. It's something we just make 300 cases of. And it's the 2017 vintage. So typically with our Rieslings, after they've been in bottle for a couple of years, they tend to develop a little bit of a petrol note. So when we're smelling these side by side, ours definitely has some petrol on it compared to the Alvareño.
This Alvareño, speaking about, the soil quality, Viña Verde is overall very granite heavy. The country overall is almost a leader in granite, and everywhere that you go, I like to joke around and say that my parents' village is sort of the live action version of the Flintstones, because the houses literally look like that. There's just stone blocks of granite. So when you think about the soil composition, you see a lot of that. There's also some a little bit of sandy acidic soils and small patches of schist, excuse my language. So in the Alvareño, you really get the minerality up front. And when you go from the Alvareño to the Riesling, in my head, it feels, you're very refreshing, high acid, very mineral. And then you go to the sort of like fruity and aromatic Riesling, and it's almost like, it's almost like a really nice wave, right? And they're really two beautiful wines to compare next to each other. This particular producer, he's a young guy. He went to college. He mastered his skills in winemaking and viticulture, and then he went home to his grandmother's land. And his plot is right, when I say right across the river from Spain, it's legitimately right across the river from Spain. And this Alvareño is this is 2018. It's one that gets more complex, deeper fruity notes as it ages. So it's one that could really hold on to age really, really well. So I really encourage you to really explore the Alvareño varietal, but more specifically the Viña Verdes, which are going to give you that really refreshing sort of escape from the heat. I'm in California and we're a searing 98 degrees today. So it's very welcome wine for us.
One of the things I think that's really interesting about this comparison is that you can tell the climates are very similar in terms of cooler climates, because you get in both a little bit riper vintages, you get great weight on the palate, but they both have really, really good acid. They're definitely different from a fruit profile and an aromatic profile that really reflect the respective soils that they're grown on. Because you get a really different profile from a minerality standpoint when you're working with those sandy soils and the schist soils and the limestone.
And when
and
you
comes through in the Alvarenga for sure.
And when you think of, you know, both regions, Portugal and Europe is considered old world because that's sort of where wine, quote unquote, started, and all the new wine that came after that. So all of the Americas and anything outside of Europe is considered new world. So when you're sort of comparing, contrasting wines, one of the leading factors of identifying where in the world something might be is what's present the most. So in European wines, you're going to have a lot more of that earthiness, a lot more of that minerality present. Whereas in the New World, in this case, Oregon, you're going to have a lot more of a fruit forward note. So it's really beautiful to see, again, two regions that have similar climates in terms of rain and sunshine and temperatures, create wines that are both refreshing but still really great in fruit and minerality. So that was my urging to sort of create this comparison, because I think it's just, if you're not trying these guys, it's we're really losing out. So I'm very excited about these things.
Are there any questions about these two wines or the comparison that have come up?
So I actually had the chance to visit Riasvalche, which has amazing eucalyptus forests off the street, covering a grapes, pergolas right by and I think that was one of the most unique regions I've ever visited. How does that impact the Alvarenga in Portugal?
Yes, Vinho Verde is actually known for having a different trellising system, and because the region is so wet, a lot of winemakers, what they're doing is that they're training their vines further up. So you are going to see sort of these higher trellising to keep their grapevines off of the floor. And not that anybody else really is growing grapevines lower to the ground. Some regions are. There's reasons for that. But because the region is so wet and so humid, that's how they train the grapevines. And it's a very distinguishing characteristic of that region. So thank you for bringing that up, Carol. I appreciate that.
I haven't gotten any other questions in chat other than Chelsea said both of these wines would be beautiful food wines. There's a lovely acid on both, but balanced.
Yeah.
So what foods would you have with these wines?
Well, I have to say first, before we talk about some of the great pairings, I just happen to have a really nice soft cheese. It's that Trader Joe's Delice de Bourgogne. If you've ever had it, it's like my absolute favorite cheese. It goes well with everything. It's been really interesting to compare and contrast the wines before and after, just the way it mellows out the acidity. They go really well together. Even though that wouldn't be my first choice of a pairing, all I want right now is like a seafood risotto so badly.
Perfect.
That sounds delicious.
Great. Should we go to the next two?
Did anybody have any other comments or any other thoughts on these two wines? I thought that they were both, I was surprised at the floral, kind of spicy floral notes that I got on the nose out of the Alvarenga, which I kind of expected that of the Riesling, and I'm not a Riesling expert, but I was really surprised at that. And I was also surprised at the similarities between the two, just on the first tasting. And as you said, a lot of acid, but there was a lot of good fruity after taste notes. It was really, they're both delicious.
I think that shellfish is probably the best thing that I've ever had with Alvarenga. And I also love the finish. Unfortunately, I'm not trying this flight, but I've tasted many Alvarengas, and when I visited the area, you could see all the shellfish growing in the ocean, the platforms. It just was absolutely incredible to stop and have all this seafood for lunch and drink the Albarino at the same time. It's amazing. Long finish too.
Yeah, you know, I like to joke that Portuguese, we love to eat. I mean, once we're still eating, we're talking about the next time we're going to eat. So I like to think that we build wines because we love to eat so much, but all of Portuguese wines are very gastronomic, you know, and it is sort of that high acid and minerality that lend it to a completely wide, you know, variety of cuisine. So honestly, if you're into Asian food, anything that you have in front of you, you have a glass of Portuguese wine and it's just going to be incredible. So yeah, so particularly in the northern regions of Portugal, in Vinha Verde, they do tend to pair these wines with seafood, but also pork is really big in the sort of central part of Portugal, and they are pairing sort of like a leaner cuts of pork or even suckling pig with a really refreshing white. So I just saw a broadcast the other day where they cooked lamb and they had white wine with it. So it's really versatile. I think that there's very few really bad pairings, so have at it, you know. So we're still going to stay in Oregon. In the next two wines, if you have it in front of you, is this Chapelero. And then we have this Amicus from Brooks. And so even though it's still the Vinha Verde region, we're going further south. This one is closer to the Douro River. So it's going to have some of that warmer climate, a lot more sun, a little more heat. So even though it's still Vinha Verde, which is known as green wine or young wine, wines coming out of that region tend to be just a little more ripe in quality. So this Chapelero, the name is, the wine was named after the winemaker's grandfather was known as the Hatter in his village. So Chapelero means the Hatter, and this is an homage to his father. This is a blend of Avesto and Loreto. And these two varietals are very aromatic. They ripen beautifully, but you still have a little bit of that frizz and a little bit of that acidity that Vinha Verde is known for. You have some tropical flavors. You have a little bit of ripe white fruits in the nose, and it's just really beautiful and still very, very much minerally. So then we pair that with the Amicus, which also has a great aroma profile. And Janie, you can talk to us more about hers.
Yeah, so Amicus was another one of those kind of lost leaders that my brother was determined to make popular in the New World. It's modeled after an Alsatian Edelsviker, so a blend of the noble varietals of Alsace, which some of those varietals are hard to find in the Willamette Valley. So while the first wine, our intention behind it is to blend Riesling from two different soil types, the goal with the Amicus is to find the best examples of each of these varietals and then blend them into this wine. So there's 5 varietals in this wine. It's a quarter Pinot Gris, a quarter Riesling, and a quarter Muscat. And then the last quarter is split between Gewürztraminer and Pinot Blanc. Super aromatic. There is a role that each one of those varietals plays in this blend. We do make bottlings of all of those varietals also, so this is not, we don't co-ferment the fruit. We keep everything separate until the end. This blend gets made at the same time as all those varietal bottlings. So it's a very intentional blend. It's a fun wine for us because it has the aromatics from the Gewürztraminer and the Muscat, and then it has great weight on the palate, but it has really good acid that the Riesling brings to the blend. And so it kind of satisfies people who like sweet, even though it's a dry wine, because it's so full of fruit and amazing aromatics.
And this Chapelero is, all these wines are dry, but this one has just a little more residual sugar. but it's not, it doesn't register as sweet. And I think that what I love about the pairing of these two wines is that it showcases the fact that you have, again, a cooler growing region that still can create some really beautifully aromatic and fruity white wines. And again, different parts of the world, but these two are probably more similar to each other than the first two were. These, like the fruit is sort of, they hit the same notes. And again, I think it's just a really excellent comparison of a European wine region and an American region and what's coming out of both. So
where the first two wines really kind of scream for food. These two you could drink without food, but they're also very versatile in terms of what they pair with. But that aromatic really drinks you in. I know a lot of people nickname our Amicus the porch pounder because it's easy drinking, but it also is super versatile, not only in terms of the audience that it pleases, but the foods that it goes with as well. And they are so similar.
yes.
We definitely called it the porch pounder in Hermosa Beach at Uncorked because, when it's summer like now and people are drinking wine, that totally fits that category.
Is there anybody on who's having these two that wants to speak to them? What are your thoughts? What are you thinking? Is there something that you love? Is there something that's interesting to you?
Yeah, just unmute yourself if you want to get in on the conversation.
Yeah, I'm really shocked, and I think you already touched on it, but just again, how similar these are, the fact that they're both blends, but there's such similarities. And they are so perfect for right now in the 90+ degree heat we're having outside this window. And man, I may not make it through this. It's so good.
Pull the cork.
I mean, I'm really, I knew this would be interesting just because who would have put these two together? But wow, it is crazy to see the similarities and the differences in both of the pairings that you guys chose. But then just to think about, they're different varietals, different styles and whatever, but, terroir and region and whatever just play such an important role when you let it do that. It seems like both of these producers are doing that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I just think that the Mediterranean climate, the cooler climates, that lends so much to similarities in regions, even when they are different varietals and different soils.
Yeah.
I have a geographical question. I know I'm much more familiar with Spanish wines, but I understand that a lot of the distinction for their wines comes from their altitude, and that the Iberian Peninsula is pretty much a plateau. So you've got some good altitude there. And I'm guessing that applies to Portugal. Is that right? Would that be correct?
Yeah, when you think about Portugal, because it's closer to the ocean, and as with any coastal region, the closer you get to the beach is the lower the altitude, right? And I actually have in my notes, it's low elevation, so I don't think that you get higher than 2,600 feet at its highest peak. But I think in relation to this particular Portuguese wine, of course, Portuguese wines overall, they're a great vehicle for terroir. And temperature comes into play the higher you are in altitude. So for this particular one, I think it's more about the temperature and where it's at in relation to the rest of Vinho Verde. But yeah, absolutely, where your grapevines are planted have a huge influence on the end results. So you can have the same varietal in the same region, but they could be, half a mile apart and, a difference of 1,000 feet, and it's a completely different wine. So it really speaks to the artistry of the winemaker and how well they take care of their land and how well they harvest their fruit. And ultimately, they create their wines based on the character that they want to show the world that they can create. But absolutely, yes.
Yeah, there's definitely broad stripes that are made about different regions, about what they're known for. But even within the Willamette Valley, I mean, it's 100 miles north to south. There's 7 sub-AVAs. You can be east facing and get morning sun that comes up behind Mount Hood, or you can be west facing, so you get the afternoon sun, which is a totally different impact in terms of ripening. Depending on where you are, related to the winds, really makes a difference in terms of how much the temperature changes in the vineyard. And then, you know, you're back to soil and you're back to vine age. Vine age makes a big difference too in terms of fruit. So that craft of really knowing what you want as an end result and being able to either pick a place to grow or to source from places that you know are going to bring those different elements that you want reflected in your final blend, or, you know, part of the hundreds of decisions that go into viticulture and winemaking.
So, Janie, is Willamette considered a high altitude region?
No, I mean that everything in the Willamette's, I think our highest vineyard might be close to 1,100 feet. And there's nothing below 250 feet. So, but you get big differences as you go up the hill. You know, we're up at 750 feet, which is considered pretty high for the Willamette Valley. Obviously, it pales in comparison to what Sandy was mentioning in Portugal. But, you know, you'll see your ripening even on one hill going from the valley floor to 750 feet. The vineyards at the bottom, you know, you're harvesting those a lot sooner. And it progresses as you go up that hill. The birds progress as it goes up the hill too. So it can have a big difference. And even just the vine age, like we work with one vineyard that was planted in the 2000s, and right across the street was one planted in the 80s. And they have the same clones, they're the same elevation, they farm the same, but they're dramatically different. I mean, younger vines too, we like to compare them to young people. They're a little bit more boisterous, they're not quite as polished, they're a little bit outspoken, a little bit forward in terms of grapes and their fruit, where the older vines tend to be more nuanced, a little bit more polished, more elegant, more balanced. So there's just a lot of different things you can do based on the history of your vineyard and its aspect and elevation and vine age and what they chose to plant there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great analogy.
It's an easy one to understand, right?
Yeah, oh, yeah.
We get wiser as we get older, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So just one interesting observation here, Oregon versus Portugal, if I can interject one other versus right now. Tasting this wine, particularly Janie, reminded me so much of my home in the Finger Lakes. And I know there's actually some people on the call tonight. I don't know if anyone was able to procure the wines, Lorraine, Donna, Karen, but it's so interesting just tasting this, where what I really get is the Gewürztraminer, which I know is not even that much in there, but it comes through so much. And there's the quality of the Finger Lakes reminds me, I'm thinking of like adding more cool climates into this. I'm like, man, we could go on and on with all of the comparisons, but this wine immediately, I think if I tasted it blind, I would have guessed I was drinking a Finger Lakes wine.
Yeah, we have lots of sisters in the Finger Lakes, but you're right, and that's what makes wine so interesting, right? I mean, just so complicated, and like you could go on forever with your education, because I think there's a lot of comparisons across regions, and that, I mean, that's just another predominant cool climate, amazing noble varietal growing region.
Let's move on to the rest, shall we? So we are now going down to, again, the down region, which is a little further south. We're now out of Viña Verde, and we're now into sort of Burgundy-like regions, and the comparison between both down in Portugal and Oregon. And again, when I'm talking to somebody about Portuguese wines, if they've never had it before, and I say, if you're a Pinot Noir person, then down is definitely a region that you would love to explore from, because they are very elegant, they're lighter, they're very minerally, So both Oregon and the down region they have that relationship to Burgundy because, well, Oregon because of Pinot Noir. Pinot Noir is a Burgundian varietal, and Oregon became known as sort of, this mecca of incredible Pinot Noir because of that varietal. And the down, they have probably the most elegant wines in all of Portugal. So ours are a blend, and there's 4 main varietals, but the similarities comes in some of the flavors, some of that pepperiness, low tannins, and again, just the elegance of the wine itself. So we have Kelman Pinto blend, 2015, and then we have Brooks Pinot Noir, 2016. So this Portuguese wine is our vegan-friendly option. And quick note about everybody that we work with, all of our producers, if they're not certified organic or working in a vegan-friendly fashion, they all work in what is called the integrated production management system. And what that means is that every step of growing their wines, the harvesting, the production of their wines is as sustainable as possible. So they're not using synthetic pesticides or herbicides unless something is happening in the vineyard and they really have to. But for the most part, everybody that we're working with is really conscious of what they're doing around them. They have earth and the environment top of mind. So they want to create the best wines that they can out of that region. And this particular producer, she is a woman owner. She is originally from Brazil, but her family is from Portugal. So she's kind of like me. Her family left Portugal. We were born elsewhere, and they decided we want to come back home and really focus on what Portugal is doing really, really well. So if you take a look at these two wines, they're lighter in style, and Pinot Noir tends to have just a lighter tint. Ours, because it's a blend, it looks just a little more purple, deeper color, and one of the main varietals is Touriga Nacional, which is their version of a Cabernet Sauvignon, meaning that it's the #1 red. It's known for structure, it's known for being really big, and it's one of the main varietals in port wine. So you're going to find any red varietal in Portugal to have Touriga Nacional in it, and this is one of the 4. There's also another varietal called Jaén, which is known as Mencía in Spain, and that's where some of that pepperiness comes from. And then there's Tinta Roriz, which is known as Tempranillo. That also came from Spain. And then the last one, this was really fun, it's called Afro Shado. And there's some people that think or they feel like this may have come from Pinot Noir, but Pinot Noir has so many children and grandchildren and so many clones around the world that chances are it is. So aside from that, what we love about this wine is that, again, it just really represents a sense of place. Douro is surrounded by 3 mountain ranges, like I said earlier. So even though it's right next to the searing hot Douro, it really is able to maintain its cool weather, its cool climate, and therefore the grapes don't ripen as much, but they really develop incredible character. There's incredible minerality, and it's just a beautifully elegant red that, again, we compare to Burgundy and their Pinots, and therefore Oregon and their Pinots as well.
Yeah, so we also make a lot of Pinots. We do a lot of single vineyards, but about 90% of our fruit comes from the Amity Hills sub-AVA, which is where we're located. And if you were to look at the 100 miles north to south, we're kind of dead center in the middle. But we have a geographical feature that really impacts the Willamette Valley and primarily impacts the Amity Hills and the Van Duzer area, and that is the Van Duzer corridor. So the Willamette Valley is flanked by 2 mountain ranges. So you have the coastal range and you have the Cascade range. There is a break in the coastal range pretty much where wind comes in through from the ocean, comes straight into the Van Duzer and the Eola-Amity Hills, and then it pushes up north. So there is really a protracted growing season in the Eola-Amity Hills that we love because we have this great temperature change in the summer. It cools down the vines. We have better acid retention, kind of our favorite thing. So when you compare like where we are in the Willamette Valley to somewhere, say like Yamhill Carlton or Dundee Hills, which you guys have all probably heard of, they aren't very far away from us, but they don't get the same impact from the winds. So they tend to have kind of bigger, more extracted, riper fruit in the same growing season that we might have. And there's also a lot more marine sedimentary soils up there, so dark fruits. So when we approach this wine, which is our Willamette Valley, we want it to reflect the whole entire Willamette Valley. If it was just in Eola-Amity Hills Pinot Noir, it would be very red fruited, really high acid, more earth and spice, so more similar to a Burgundian wine. So this one's pretty fruit forward actually for us, with a lot of dark fruit. And it's interesting because in comparison with the Portuguese wine, wine's floral. It's really pretty. It has kind of more of that cherry cola versus dark fruits. But they're both very well balanced. They're both very elegant wines. Neither one of them, the tannins are very soft and pretty in both of them. But there's a nice contrast, I think, in terms of the fruit style, which if you had a different one of our wines from the Eola-Amity Hills, they would be even more similar. The fun and the philosophy, you know, at least the leash that I give our winemaker, Chris Williams, who's been with the brand for 20 years, we love to see all these differences, and we keep everything in small lots. And so when he does single vineyard bottlings, he's not making a wine that fits his style. He's making a wine to respect that grower. So if it's 1/3, 1/3, and 1/3 of different clones, his single vineyard from that land is 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, versus him picking what his style of barrels would be. And so, you know, when you taste a lot of our wines, they're all very different from each other, and they should be. Every vineyard tastes different. So I love this. I do agree that there are a lot of earthy characteristics, a lot of spice in this, in the Portuguese wine, that definitely lend itself towards Pinot Noir.
Janie, hi, I have a question. My name is Vanya. How typical would you say this Pinot Noir is for the area, for Willamette area?
Ours?
Yes.
Very.
Okay, because I've never been, I have only tasted a few from that region, so.
Yeah, I mean, in general, people associate Willamette Valley Pinot Noir, and again, this is general, right? There's a zillion producers up there, and there's a bunch of different styles, but more of fruit forward. So you're into blackberries and blueberries, plums. You're not necessarily into the bright red fruits. And that is why we make this, because this is our wine that gets poured by the glass the most around the country. And so when someone's ordering a Willamette Valley Pinot by the glass, if the majority of expectations is more for that darker fruit and a little bit more fruit forward, that is our goal with this wine, so that it meets that expectation. Yet it kind of has our Brooks stamp on it in terms of good acidity, being really food friendly, and being really elegant, because we don't use a lot of new oak. So the tannins are always pretty soft in our wines.
Thank you.
So I have a question for both of you, Sandy and Janie. So of these three sets of wines we just compared, which one set do you think was the most similar?
I think the second set, the two whites.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, for me, I think it's just all about like the nose and that fruit quality, and that white within our portfolio is the most aromatic white that we have, and I think it just lends itself to be just a little more international, and something that, again, if I'm putting in front of people for the first time, say, here, try this, and they love it. And the Alvarinho is actually one that I've converted beer drinkers into wine drinkers. You know, and for me, it's just so important to just be able to explore, you know, and I'm guilty of not exploring my own backyard. You know, I'm in California. Oregon is not that far away. So, you know, we tend to live in the box that we live in. And I think that doing these comparisons is really important because it allows us to sort of see what's out there and explore, you know, a company like Brooks that we may know more of and say, hey, I did not realize that she had all these versions of Rieslings and all these different Pinots, and then be able to take that and break through the boundaries and try something new from a completely different region that you probably never even thought of. So yeah, I mean, that those two wines for me, I think, were just was cemented this experiment of sorts, because it's like you get to different regions, but the varietals are nowhere near each other, but they still have just such great aroma and such great fruitiness to it, and they're both just delicious in their own right. And Janie's right, you can just, you know, be in your porch and just have it.
The other thing that I think is interesting about all 6 of these wines is you hear the debate all the time about land versus hand and how much the winemaker is involved in the winemaking process. And all of these reflect the truth in place, for sure. They all reflect the varietal that they are. They all reflect the soils that they were grown on, the climate that they were grown in. They're all really, really, really pretty wines.
So Janie, I have a question for you. If you were to go do another cruise on the Douro, your Brooks wines, would you have a better understanding of how to compare them to Portuguese wines now?
Well, I don't know about Douro wines necessarily. I think I would still have to go outside of that region to find something that might be similar. There's definitely good contrast.
Vino Verde was just north, right? Vino Verde was just the north, and Dow was just to the south of the river when she showed the map earlier. So it looked like they were kind of both influenced by that river.
They are, but they made me focus on wines that were grown right on the river.
Like the port varietals.
And just really big reds.
Yeah.
So
what cruise were you on?
My other question is, okay, so we're thinking of Burgundy, and Oregon is always called, you know, compared to Burgundy. And so now the Dow region in Portugal is like the Burgundy of Portugal. So if you're going to triangulate those regions, how do you compare your wines to Burgundy? Then I'll ask Sandy how she compares hers.
You know, there's a couple differences. I mean, yes, we're the same latitude, about the same amount of rainfall, but the rain happens at different times in our 2 regions. Like, we get rain in the winter and we get rain in the late fall, but we're pretty dry most of the summer when we have our heat. And Burgundy gets a lot more rain, and they have a lot more weather pressure all year round than we do. So they deal with a lot more weather issues that dictate a lot of their growing season than we do. I would never, I like to say that we approach our wines, I don't say this actually in an old world style, but we really like them to be expressive of place and to not be super ripe. And you can get some super ripe Pinot Noirs, not only in Oregon, but other regions in the US, which you don't see that in Burgundy. I mean, it's the motherland for sure. I would never, most of us don't say that in Oregon because they're not the same. You definitely get more of that just beautiful earthy characteristic and forest flora and barnyard and all the wonderful things in Burgundy on a consistent basis. You find that in pockets in Oregon, either by producer or by location.
And you're more similar to Burgundy, of course, because you're growing Pinot Noir, they're growing Pinot Noir. And would I be correct in saying a lot the clones originally came from Burgundy and were planted in Oregon?
Well, we have a lot of the Dijon clones in Oregon. And there is Pomard, there are a few. But we have a good potpourri of different clones in Oregon. But yeah, a lot of what is successful in Burgundy is successful in Oregon too, from a clonal standpoint.
So let me ask Sandy then, why is this region in Portugal called the Burgundy region of Portugal? A completely different grape, yet.
I think
Is it the climate?
it's not as much as the climate. I think it's just more stylistically the way that the grape varietals in the wine is being created and treated, right? So I equate winemaking to the way that an artist paints a portrait, right? And it's all about style, it's all about grace. And the down region actually for a very long time was just not even well known within Portugal itself, you know, up until the early 90s, late 80s, a lot of the winemakers, not just in down, but other regions, it was a dictatorship, and the government told them that if they grew grapes, they had to be part of a co-op. So whether you had high quality grapes or not, basically, if you weren't providing your grapes to the big poorhouses, everybody's grapes went into the same bucket, right? So once the European Union came into play and they got out of that dictatorship, they had more ownership of how they were treating their grapes and how they were treating their wines. So down is now a region that's known for really elegant wines with a true sense of place. And I think Burgundy is very much that. Burgundy, you know, and I haven't explored Burgundy as well as others have, but I know that they use Pinot Noir as a vehicle to express their terroir, to really encapsulate where that particular wine came from. It came from this very particular, you know, piece of land from this particular producer, and they show the best that wine can be from that particular plot. Douro, I mean, rather down, is doing something similar in the sense of we're really trying to create not the really big reds from the Douro region, not the fruitier reds from the Alentejo, because there's a whole other series in Alentejo in California comparison that I think we should get into, but it's a whole other conversation. And it's not sort of like these really high mineral wines from Viña Verde and what have you. The wines from down, I have an Encruzado from the same producer from Kelman that I tell them, if you are into a Chablis, a lighter white that doesn't have a ton of wood, but it has some great body, great structure, this Encruzado is for you. So again, I think it just really comes down to the artistry that goes into each bottle and the elegance of the wines themselves. And that's how down is setting itself apart, and how it's sort of bringing in the conversation surrounding Burgundy. It's just the quality and the sophistication in each glass versus big and powerful and meaty. It's just, it's just beautiful and graceful.
Sandy, a question for you, because we, you know, Joseph Duran came to Oregon from Burgundy and started his own property in the mid 80s. And we've continued, and especially in the last 10 years, to see a lot of French winemakers, a lot of French owners. You know, Shado has a property now in Oregon. Have you seen any of that in Portugal? Do you, because the laws are so restrictive in Burgundy, and, you know, that exploring internationally, I think, is really interesting. And I just don't know if that's happening in Portugal as well, where you have French producers coming in.
I think what you're actually starting to see is the opposite. We're starting to see a couple of things. One, especially down further in the southern regions of Portugal, we're starting to see some Cabernet Sauvignon, some Chardonnay being planted. There's some Chardonnay being planted in Viña Verde as well. I think it's important to highlight the authenticity of the region. I don't know what a Portuguese single varietal Chardonnay is like. One day I'll get into it. But it's kind of like how winemakers and producers think about their land, like what grows best where. But also, I think some people are trying to appease the international market. So we are seeing some of those French varietals and more international varietals coming into Portugal, but we're also seeing the opposite. There's actually some Touriga Nacional being planted in Bordeaux. So we're seeing some of these Portuguese varietals going to France. Alvarinho is being planted here in Central Coast, California. Nacional is also being planted in Texas. So I think it's more the opposite that's happening, where people are coming to Portugal and say, hey, let me take this varietal, it grows in a similar region, and let me try it somewhere new to give it a different expression.
Which only makes the wine world more confusing.
Yeah. But more fun to explore, right? I mean, like, maybe one day I'll have an Alvarinho from Portugal and Alvarinho from California comparison. I don't know.
Yeah, Oregon too.
Oregon as well. You know, once you get away from the this is mine and this grows best only here, then, you know, things become more fun but more confusing, like you said.
Yeah.
So I have a question for Janie. Because of your location, where your headquarters are, would you say that you have a huge diurnal temperature change compared to the rest of Willamette Valley? Because that, to me, that factor is one of the more important in making dark fruit, and I love the dark fruit.
Yeah, we definitely do. So the Willamette Hills, the Van Duzer corridor, or Van Duzer AVA, which is right next to us, and the McMinnville from those Van Duzer winds. And we will have a 15-degree temperature shift in our vineyard in the afternoons during the summer, which is huge. And we even, I mean, the winds are so strong where we are. We built a new building in 2014, and I purposefully put its footprint on the piece of land that we had to protect the tasting room patio from the winds, because it's not fun to be out there on a summer afternoon actually in those winds.
Oh, I imagine. Well, I remember doing a tasting of Syrah from all different places around the world, and my favorite, without doubt, was the coldest of any of the climates of the Syrah that were grown, because Syrah will grow anywhere. But this was a break in the Chilean mountains that were against the sea, and it had the Humboldt current coming right through, and the Andes Mountains, the cold air coming down from the Andes Mountains and out from the sea. It was very big temperature changes, but it made the best wines, best grapes, I should say. And they took it from there.
Yeah, you know that in the top 100 wineries for wine and spirits this year, there were 36 domestic, and 9 of them were from Oregon. 6 of them were in the Willamette Hills, and I don't think that's a coincidence. I think there's a characteristic of the wines from that region and the vineyards in that area that's different than the rest of the Willamette Valley.
Wow. I'm sure that's the big factor. I remember being in Chile, and it was the Humboldt current from the Antarctic that was the one of the big factors, because there was a break in the mountain right there.
Yeah. Well, and it's a blessing and a curse a little bit, because when you have hot seasons, hot growing seasons like we've had in Oregon from 2014 to 2018, it was a blessing for sure. When you have really, really cool vintages and you've lengthened your ripening that long, it can be pretty stressful, but we like that. In Oregon, we're used to that. That's more of a typical vintage like we just had in 19.
I just wanted to say thank you to you both for the time and just such an interesting wine pairing. What a great way to spend a Thursday night. And sadly, I still have a few left in my glass, so I guess I'll head out to the porch here in a minute and pound the rest of it. But I'll unmute it for a moment and let anyone have any last minute comments. And then I also did want to, the purpose of these is honestly just to get everybody together and to learn a little while we drink a little wine. But we're not trying to sell anything, but I would like the opportunity to let Janie and Sandra at least talk to, how to find them online and that sort of thing. Just because they've spent the time doing this, and I would love to just for you guys to know how to find them if you didn't already find them tonight. So please go ahead and tell us where we can find you, what's the easiest way to get a hold of you guys, and then I'll open it up for any kind of last minute chitter chatter, and that's it.
Well, you can find them at Uncorked in Hermosa Beach.
Yes. Yes.
If you're in the LA area, for sure. Great supporters. And if you can't, we sell everything online. So it's www.brookswine.com. There's a lot of choices. We just put up a new website, and the product pages I think are super duper helpful. We have quotes. We have pictures of kind of the top flavor profiles, and then we have quotes from both our chef, our sommelier, and our assistant winemaker. So you really get a good sense from their perspective about our wines. But you can always email me to Janie@brookswine.com. And thank you. Thanks for having me. Thanks for being here.
I would say that I too can be found in Uncorked. So if you're in the area, please give them a visit. They're incredible. They're great supporters, and I love going down there and just seeing Jeff and Nancy. So thank you all so much. Otherwise, I just put my website on the chat. Diniz Cellars, Diniz Cellars, and that is an homage to family and country. So it's very near and dear to me. And yeah, so look, the wines that we had today, not a single one was above $20. So the value that Portuguese wine brings for the quality, I think is, bar none. And I love, I love sharing these wines with every one of you, and I love being introduced to folks like Janie, who obviously I also want to support women-led businesses. And I definitely want to thank the Women For WineSense LA for everything that you guys have done, and for being such huge supporters. And we're just trying to help each other and just have good wine in the meantime. And we also do have a 20% off for friends and family. Code Portugal, very easy. So anywhere that, anything that you want on the side is just 20% off. So by all means.
And we're happy to do that too. Women For WineSense, new code.
Awesome.
Type it in. We'll get it set up.
Thank you guys. Thank you.